Hey everybody, welcome back to the So We Speak podcast. This is Cole Fakes, and I'm joined by Terry Fakes, and we are discussing the latest breaking news today in this conflict between Israel, the U.S., and Iran. And we were talking before this episode. I think from the moment we begin this episode to the end, some of our information here will already be out of date. This is one of those things that's just
Yeah,
developing so fast. You want to be careful being too assertive on things because from last night to today, we're recording this on Tuesday. It'll come out Wednesday. I guarantee by tomorrow, something will have changed that we're going to talk about today.
undoubtedly. Yeah, I think the value in this, though, is to go back to the beginning and frame up the trajectory of this because you get so caught up in the day-to-day news cycle. Sometimes you lose sight of where this whole thing began and the bigger picture because it's a startling picture if you go back to October 7th, 2023, and the Hamas attack on Israel. And that's really what began the sequence of events that most recently have terminated with the United States bombing Iran's nuclear facilities. There is a direct line between those two events.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to frame this. We really want to talk about this longer trajectory that's taken place, put things in historical context, see beyond just the moment what we're dealing with, put it in theological perspective, which we'll try to do a little bit at the end here. But the pressing questions I think people are asking right now, it was surprising, I think, to some people that we bombed the facilities. I think, Trump saying, I'll decide in the next 2 weeks. And then 2 days later, the mission is
Hmm.
taken out. I think there's some interesting things going on there. But I think a lot of people are just wondering, what does this mean for the world? I mean, at
Right.
first, I think from an economic perspective, people thought there was going to be a price shock in um, gas and oil across the world. I think people thought we could be in World War III. Are we going to put troops anywhere? I will say before we begin this narrative, as we're sitting here now, a lot of that has already waned, which has been very interesting. This conflict
Right.
is not like some of the others. I think on the economic side, you saw the stock market yesterday and today go way up. I mean, people are not banking on there being a huge
Right.
supply problem. They're not thinking that there's going to be extended fighting that's going to disrupt any supply chains or anything like that. I think the worries about the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz and all those things, people are feeling better than they were last week.
Hmm.
On the flip side, are people, thinking this is going to be a big, long, extended thing? I think the early polling on Americans is that almost everybody thinks this was the right thing to do. In fact, I'll give you a stat that's maybe the most amazing stat of the Trump presidency so far. There were some impeachment articles introduced against President Trump for taking this action, which I will say is a much more legitimate question than some of the other impeachment attempts, that have been made against him. Is does the president have the power to order something like this? He is the commander in chief, but he cannot declare war, without the vote of Congress. So that's at least an interesting question to think about. Does he have the authority to do this? Well, it's got to be one of the most bipartisan votes that he's ever had, while he's been president. There were more than 100 Democrats in the House who voted with Republicans to say he did have the power to do this. So the American
Hmm.
public, while they may be divided over certain pieces of this, it does seem like the American public is pretty on board with what happened. And I think that even will be an interesting piece of how this narrative came to be. This has actually been a long time coming. The reputation of Iran in America is not good. And
Hmm.
so it's been interesting to see that this has come and gone without as much fanfare as maybe we thought there would be.
Yeah, I agree. I think I saw, last week, just a week ago on CNN, the one of their commentators was showing a poll, and in this poll, 83% of Republicans, 79% of independents, and 79% of Democrats all agreed Iran should not be able to get a nuclear weapon. In my lifetime, Cole, I those are astounding numbers, and particularly in our polarized society, to have 79% of Democrats and 83% of Republicans agree on anything
Right.
is just amazing. So you're
Yeah.
right. We have gotten to the point now. Not all of those people thought we should strike them, but the point is,
Hmm.
there is this unanimity that Iran is a bad player on the world stage, and is a threat not only to the Middle East, but to have those kind of poll numbers, people really did understand that Iran was ultimately a threat to the United States as well.
Right. Well, let's trace some of what's happened in the last 2 years, and I think this will begin to make sense of a lot of things that have occurred in the last week. So, again, this story does go back further than October 7th, and for that story, go ahead and look at our Making of Modern Israel, the State of Israel series that we did. You've done a longer series at Crossings on Wednesday night talking about the making of the modern Middle East. So all the players introduced here go back. We covered some of that. Where did Hamas come from? Where did Hezbollah come from? Why is Iran run by
Hmm.
this theocratic, oppressive regime? But our story begins back on October 7th, a couple of years ago. Hamas attacks Israel. It was a surprise. They're coming from Gaza. And we went into this a little bit in our podcast, but I'll just recap here. Gaza is an area within Israel that is the home to a group of people called the Palestinians. We've gone into the history of who these people are. And it is encompassed in Israel's country, but they don't do security, they don't do the municipal leadership, any of
Right.
that in these areas. So they have become these little cells of terrorist activity. And on October 7th, this attack slipped through Israeli intelligence. They come out of Gaza. They kill more than 1,200 Israelis. 250 hostages are taken. It's the worst massacre, worst intelligence failure in the history of Israel, and the worst killing on the world stage since the Holocaust. So it's a terrible, terrible day. And the more footage and the more information you saw of what happened, the worse it got. There was that festival that had 300 people alone that were killed. And anyway, Hamas took these hostages, and so Israel immediately began to invade the Hamas strongholds in Gaza. They set their goal to get the hostages back, to destroy Hamas, and they're still doing that in some ways. There are still, I looked up this morning, there are still 50 hostages. 27 of those are presumed to be dead. The United States, we've gotten our hostages out, but the Israeli army is still doing operations in Gaza. Now, Gaza is at this point rubble. I mean, it's a huge
Hmm.
humanitarian crisis brought on by Hamas. And even during the conflict, you had the United States trying, the Biden administration did try to send and facilitate. They built that pier and all that, to facilitate food
Hmm.
coming in. And yet Hamas is robbing it from their people. And so Israel actually for a while there in this whole narrative, this is the low point for Israel. They were embattled militarily, they were embattled in the UN, they were embattled across the world. I mean, even the United States was wavering in some ways in supporting them. There are still people out there saying that they've committed genocide in Gaza. I mean, this was a place where Israel and Hamas, Israel stock was shrinking very quickly. What happens after this? So militarily, they did lose some people, but this was not an extremely difficult military maneuver for them. It was long, it was tedious, but it was pretty well assured that they were going to win against Hamas. The difficulty, the thing that everybody was worried about was what's going to happen in the north? What's going to happen with Hezbollah in Lebanon? They are much bigger, they're better armed, they are better led, they're another
Hmm.
Iranian proxy, and they had fired some rockets into Israel starting on October 7th, but there hadn't been a huge formal incursion. For example, they hadn't invaded. Israel was doing a few exercises, but they hadn't, launched an all-out assault until September, almost a year later, September of 2024. If you remember this, you had the pager attack on Hezbollah, and this still needs to be a movie. This is one of the greatest
Hmm.
Mossad operations of all time. The intelligence on this is incredible. So the Israelis set up this company called BAC Consulting, and it's a Hungarian company under contract to produce these devices on behalf of a Taiwanese company called Gold Apollo. Of course, this is a front. These are Israeli operatives who are running this company. And they basically are a maker distributor in the Middle East for this Taiwanese company. They start making pagers because, and we talked about this in our previous episodes, Hezbollah was very wary of Israel's intelligence capabilities with technology.
Hmm.
So you had
Right.
some of their leaders saying, hey, get off of phones, iPhones, we don't want that. Well, Israel, they anticipated this. As early as 2022, they start shipping these pagers into Lebanon to Hezbollah operatives that have a battery with these chemicals that they can detonate and turn these pagers into bombs, basically. So way far before October 7th, they've built this company, they've staffed it with their people, they've got these contracts. They're actually supplying other people besides Hezbollah. But of course, all of this is to get these pagers in the hands of the leaders of Hezbollah. And then they wait for their
Hmm.
moment in September, middle of September in 2024. They send out a message, they get everyone to grab the pagers and they detonate them. And they killed a lot of people. They injured a lot of people. They effectively crippled the leadership of Hezbollah, and then they went in and knocked out their top military commanders, top leaders. They killed Hassan Nasrallah, who was the head of Hezbollah from 2000 on. I mean, it was as slow as it was attacking Hamas. It was eye-opening to see how good their intelligence was and how forcefully they were able to decapitate Hezbollah. So if we stop here for a moment, what they've done is they've taken the two Iranian proxies that are on their border and they've destroyed both of them in the span of about a year. They've done it not as a preemptive strike. They've done it because they were attacked, brutally attacked. They were threatened, and when they went to war with these two organizations, before a year had passed, they destroyed effectively both of them.
Exactly. And, in the meantime, because those aren't all of Iran's allies, as while they're fighting them, they have to worry about Syria. Bashar al-Assad was the leader of Syria, and he was no stranger to violence. He had gassed his own people back in the Obama administration, and Barack Obama had said, "Here's the red line. Don't use the gas," and he did, and nothing happened. And so, of course, he became more emboldened and became even more brutal. And Syria has a long history of trying to attack Israel, and so they were planning to get in on it. However, Syria, because of his leadership, has been in the middle of a civil war. And it isn't just a two-sided civil war, it's a many-sided civil war. America had troops there, Russia had troops there. America pulled out, and Russia was propping up the Assad regime. But when all the dust settled, a leader named Ahmad al-Sharaa, former Al-Qaeda guy, has a militant group that is very militarily effective and essentially overthrows the Assad regime. And Assad has to flee to Russia. Well, everybody wondered what will happen when he gets in. And it turns out, even though he is a radical, his goal is, look, I just want to get along with everybody else, and I'm going to work on helping the Syrian people. So now, Iran, Syria's off the board. Hezbollah's been defanged. Hamas is ineffective. And the only people left still shooting weapons were the Houthis, whom Iran had been arming, and they are a militant group out of Yemen. And they began to shoot missiles not just at Israel, but disrupting shipping that is going through the Red Sea.
Yeah, so these are basically the four big groups that were proxies for Iran in the Middle East. And it's important to understand that some people have criticized Israel for talking about threatening attacking Iran when they were attacked by these other groups. And we'll get to something in a minute that was kind of the last piece of the puzzle for Israel to attack Iran. But before we get there, this is a network. This is an axis of resistance in the Middle East. Their stated goal, many of these organizations and states, their stated goal is to wipe Israel off the map, to kill all the Israelis. And they feel that way about the United States as well. They're just not as close and they're not strong enough. But you have the great Satan and the little Satan, the US and Israel. And so there is an ongoing, as long as we exist, we will seek to destroy Israel. So what Israel did is they methodically, and the execution on this was incredible. They methodically destroyed all the proxies of Iran in the region and then turned their attention to Iran. The one thing I want to go back and point out, I think this is a dot that isn't connected for a lot of people. People see why weakening Hezbollah and Hamas, even the Houthis to an extent, weakened Iran. But the big key here was the fall of the Assad government in Syria. And that's for
Right.
two reasons. One, if you think about it, Iran and Syria are the only two states that are involved here. Their resources, their abilities, their stature on the world stage makes it such that they have much more at their disposal than somebody
Hmm.
like Hezbollah. All these organizations are essentially dependent on them. So when the Assad government falls in Syria, a lot of things happen. One, it's a huge cutoff in money that they were able to funnel into these other groups. Two, Syria had been basically a highway to get munitions, money, people, armies, weapons, anything you could name through to these other groups. And now that effectively was stopped. That's, kind of say what you want about this guy in Syria. I think time will tell if he ends up being neutral, if he ends up being bad, if he ends up being worse than Assad, which would be difficult, but it's possible. But as of now, what he's done is he's essentially cut off the flow of these weapons and these supplies to these other groups. So Iran lost a huge component of their strategy when the Assad government fell. The other thing that's interesting about this is, if you remember, once Assad and his family fled to Russia and Damascus was taken, Israel immediately began to shoot missiles at weapons stockpiles in Syria. They
Right.
did not want these falling into anybody else's hands. It was a good opportunity to destroy things. And this ruffled the feathers, at least initially, of the main backer of this group that pushed out Assad, which was Turkey. Turkey is an interesting component in this mix. They probably will have the greatest say in what happens in Syria in the future. They are a U.S. ally who had been moving towards a more autocratic, oppressive government in the previous years, but they really don't like Iran. And they
Right.
really don't like Assad. So for a while, what happened is they became a de facto ally with Israel's aims in the Middle East. This was
Hmm.
huge. This is huge. It opens the door for Israel to act in Syria. It opens the door for them to not have to worry about another big time country with a lot of resources opposing anything that they're doing. So these causes aligned at the right time. The Houthis, the United States actually started bombing the Houthis because of their attacks on our own ships, and that's the entry point, I think, for a lot of what the U.S. has done here, because this was under the Trump administration. So in March, President Trump authorized strikes on the Houthis. By May, for various reasons, he stopped the strikes on the Houthis, kind of declared victory, and so did the Houthis. And this led to what people have been talking about this week called taco, which is Trump always chickens out. And I don't know if you could come up with a more motivational slogan for somebody like Donald Trump than Trump always chickens out. It's like, with a kid, if you tell them not to do it, they're guaranteed to do it. So I don't know if this is a witty bit of reverse psychology or what, but Republicans criticize Trump for stopping the attack on the Houthis, basically admitting defeat against this little band of rebels. And I think that played a big role in what happened this week with Iran. The third kind of strand of this, so if you've got Israel's attacks on these proxies, if you have the fall of the Assad regime, the third strand of this is the U.S. negotiations with Iran that started earlier this year. So in April, President Trump, again, was criticized for this because he's been so strong against Iran. He pulled out of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, criticized the Obama administration, criticized the Biden administration, and then sends this letter to open up negotiations with the Ayatollah. So a lot of people, I think rightly so, thought, what are they doing here? They got to make a deal. I remember all these op-eds that were written that week when he sent this letter. Trump sells out Israel. A lot of the podcasts that we've
Hmm.
listened to that are so good on what was going on in Israel thought Trump has betrayed Israel. He's going to cut a deal with Iran and leave Israel hanging out to dry. That's not what ended up happening, but at the time it was a bizarre move. So he gives them 60 days to negotiate on dismantling their enrichment program, seeking peace in the region, all of this. And it did seem a little bit out of step with the Abraham Accords that they had done in the first Trump administration. What ended up happening is they gave him this 60-day timeline. And at the end of May, so almost to the end of this 60 days, the IAEA, which is the International Atomic Energy Agency, announced that actually during all these talks, Iran is sprinting to enrich more uranium, weapons grade uranium. Probably everybody this week got, a minor certification in uranium enrichment. You got the 60%, you got the 90%, but the 60%
Right.
is 90% of the way to the 90% and
Yeah.
all of that. Basically, they're really, really pushing the limits, not just for uh, humanitarian purposes. They're building weapons grade uranium. They're trying to figure out how to attach it to a
Clearly.
warhead. And the IAEA and others blow the whistle on this. About 2 weeks later, they find them having breached their agreements about building nuclear weapons. And the day that the 60 days are up, Trump's like, well, should have got a deal, but you didn't. The next day, Israel strikes Iran. So when this happens, there had been talk behind the scenes. You know that
Hmm.
Trump had given at least an okay, and there's a lot of stuff that's going to come out about that in the last week or two. I'm sure there will be a lot more that happens. One thing to point out in 2024, actually, you might remember this from the news. Iran launched about 200 missiles directly at Israel. So think about this time frame wise. This is during the time that Israel is decapitating Hezbollah. The main leaders have been killed, the military leaders have been killed. All this has happened, and so Iran is looking very weak. They've had Hamas eliminated. They've had Hezbollah eliminated. So they launched these missiles. They're not terribly effective. They're mostly shot down. The U.S. shoots some
Hmm.
down. And Israel's allies from the Abraham Accords are facilitating, if not shooting down, they're facilitating the U.S. and Israel airspace, shooting these down in the region. It's a moment where Iran looks incredibly weak and isolated. So then we fast forward to last week, June 13th, the day after the 60-day window closes, Israel attacks. They kill 16 of the IRGC, which is the Iranian military commanders, 14 nuclear scientists. They strike their missiles, their capacity to shoot missiles at
Ballistic missile launchers. Yeah.
Israel. They strike nuclear facilities. I mean, it was another one of those moments. They had a drone facility they were shooting there that they had built over the last few years in Iran. With people thinking that they were Iranian. I mean, incredible intelligence operation here. They essentially did what they had done to Hezbollah to Iran, which is saying
Right.
something
Hmm.
because it's a far more sophisticated, wealthy, far more intricate process than striking Hezbollah. But their intelligence was so good that in the matter of a week, they were able to essentially cripple Iran.
Exactly. And this was amazing. One of the reasons they were able to do that was the Iranian regime is not popular with the Iranian people, hasn't been for some time. The problem of regime change, which we'll get to later, is I'm not sanguine about their ability to have regime change for the simple reason that the regime has all the guns. They don't have a
Hmm.
Second Amendment like we do. But what has worked for Israel is they could not have done a lot of what they've done without insiders. A lot of the
Hmm.
Iranian people helping Israel with intelligence, the ability to launch drones from just outside Tehran. I mean, no chance of defending against that. Complete surprise attack and taking out with pinpoint accuracy these IRGC commanders and nuclear scientists. Those things were done with intelligence assets that were Iranian. So while I don't know if the Iranian people have the wherewithal to effect regime change, they certainly have the wherewithal to undermine the current regime.
Right.
But what happened there is significant. And Israel was taking advantage. And again, I just want to connect this. Once October 7th happened, Israel engages Gaza and Hamas. Hezbollah jumps in, so Israel engages them. The Houthis jump in, so Israel engages them. Iran fires at them, so now they have a green light to directly fire at Iran. And Israel decides there's no better time to deal with the nuclear threat. I
Yes.
don't believe that Israel is pursuing regime change. Israel has known for a long time that they cannot let Iran get a nuclear weapon. And so Iran's actions have opened the door for Israel to pursue this with the umbrella, which they rarely have, of world backing.
Right. Yeah, if you look at this
Basically,
week versus, even 2 years ago, their
right,
standing in the world now almost has never been higher.
right.
Whereas, when they were fighting Hamas, they were extremely unpopular. Some of that is the difference between the Trump administration and the Biden administration.
It is.
But
Right.
some of that is the what they had to do to defeat Hamas was incredibly brutal. And a lot of people in Gaza died. There are a lot of different statistics on how many people were Hamas fighters, how many civilians. It was brutal, and war is brutal. And, as time goes on, there will be a lot more clarity about those operations. However, that's a far cry from attacking the leadership of Hezbollah, the Houthis, and the Ayatollah in Iran because there what they've done is so precise, it is so targeted, it's so directed, and it's so obvious to everybody that these groups, these leadership groups, basically exist to fund and cause terror around the world. That people are for it. People are really for what Israel is doing if it means keeping Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. So,
The optics, yeah, and I would say, Cole, the optics are different. With the optics on Gaza are big, powerful Israel going after Gaza and Hamas, even though Hamas did horrific things. The optics aren't good. Now, however, you've got great big Iran and little Israel, and Israel is
right,
striking military targets, and Iran is shooting at residential areas, trying to kill people. So a rare thing has happened, and that is that it has muted, it hasn't changed anyone's mind, but it has muted the world's criticism of Israel because
right.
now they're the underdog in this battle.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you have these free Palestine, pro-Palestinian protests on American college campuses, for example, and no pro-Iran uh, demonstrations. I mean, a few anti-Israel, but that just gives you a sense of the difference in the optics,
Right.
in the support, everything. So if you look at the storyline coming around, basically Israel was attacked. They eliminated Iran's proxies, and we said this in our episodes right after October 7th. It was inevitable if they defeated the proxies, which nobody knew at that point if they would be successful. But it was inevitable if they defeated the proxies that they were going to have to strike Iran. It's been Netanyahu's goal for a very long time. It's a window of opportunity that, like you said, they had not just to go on the offensive, but to respond to attacks on their own soil. I saw somebody playing a video the other day of Netanyahu saying for the last 20 years, Iran is 2 weeks away from a nuclear weapon. And the effect of watching that, is okay, maybe this guy's crying wolf. But actually, that has been relatively true for the last 20 years. I mean, this has
Hmm.
been their goal, and it's been Netanyahu's goal to keep it from happening. And so you had this window of opportunity. It was never going to be a better time. I think a lot of sharp commentators thought that Iran was kind of a paper tiger and they had funded these proxies, but their bark was worse than their bite. That has turned out to be true. How much of that Israel knew before they attacked, I don't know. But even this week in the response attacks, they've been able to launch very few missiles, very ineffectively. They signaled their strike on the air bases around to the United States ahead of time. They did not want casualties. They don't want the United States to act again. So you've brought this all the way around. Israel has effectively vanquished, not to say that all this is said and done, but Israel
Hmm.
has on a grand scale vanquished some of their major threats all within the last 2 years. And this brings us to last weekend, where Israel, it seems, had come to the end of their capabilities. They had struck a couple of the nuclear facilities. They had eliminated the nuclear scientists. They had eliminated the IRGC commanders. They had broadcast, at least to the world, that they knew where the Ayatollah was, but they hadn't killed him. And there was this one facility that they were not able to hit. So they asked the United States to be involved. This facility called Fordow is under a mountain. I've read a couple of different things on it, but something along the lines of almost 300 feet of limestone and concrete between the surface and this enrichment facility. There's only one country in the world who has the ability, or at least, is willing to say they have the ability to destroy
Hmm.
this facility. It's the United States. And this mission really was interesting because the bombs that you need to destroy this Fordo facility are called massive ordnance penetrators or bunker busters. And there are these 30,000 pound bombs that are kind of like when you drop them, they're kind of like a drill. They go into the ground and they continue to explode and continue to explode and kind of bury themselves deeper. But these bombs can only be dropped by one kind of airplane in the United States, and it's these B-2 Spirits. And I was amazed and excited to see that these Spirits are housed. Every one of them is housed at this military base in the middle of nowhere in Missouri. So, like outside of Kansas City, in this place called Knob Noster, Missouri, which is like a little farm community, or so you think. But the,
Right.
Strategic Strike Command for the whole U.S. is there with these B-2s and all of that. So these B-2s are there in Missouri. They're serviced at Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma City. And a lot of our listeners are in the Oklahoma area. Oklahoma played a role in this. They had this operation called Operation Midnight Hammer. Trump gives the kind of strategic cover to say, I'll decide in the next couple of weeks, but they'd already decided right after that how they're going to do this. They send a bunch of these B-2s west towards Guam. Everybody covers that. While that's happening, these B-2s are flying nonstop. They have a
Hmm.
9,000-mile fuel range. So, and going to where they were going is 12,000 miles away. So they refuel them in the air. They are so stealthy and difficult to pick up that they fly straight from Missouri all the way to Iran. They bomb the Fordo facility. Six of these B-2s dropped 12 MOPs. The seventh one dropped two MOPs on Natanz, which is another facility. And then this submarine that we have over in that area was able to fire 30 Tomahawk missiles. How you fire these out of a submarine is beyond my pay grade, but 30 missiles at the Natanz and Isfahan sites, effectively crippling Iran's nuclear capabilities and return. And if you believe the reporting as it stands now, which there's a lot still to come out on this, they were not even picked up by
Right.
Iran's military. Not a shot was fired. They went in, they dropped these bombs, they left. The pilots returned home after, I think I saw 36 hours straight of
Right.
flying back to Missouri. Those people that, took part in this mission, it's very heroic, pretty amazing, their service to the country. And President Trump comes on, announces that we've destroyed these facilities. You got a little bit more information the following day. I saw Iran and others are claiming that, there hasn't been a lot of damage done. But I think as things have gone on a little bit, it does look like there's substantial damage to this Fordo facility. And then to wrap this up, you had a peace agreement announced yesterday, what would have been Monday, broken Tuesday, re-upped Tuesday, and you, listener, will know more than we do by the time you listen to this about what's happening in real time between Trump and Netanyahu and the Ayatollah as we progress through this week.
Two points I would make. One is Israel, without Israel taking out the surface to air missiles, they really got air superiority. And air superiority doesn't just mean that you've defeated the other guy's airplanes. It means that you've taken out some very sophisticated Russian anti-aircraft facilities. And having done that made America's job a little bit easier as well. I think America did what only America can do, but I think you cannot underestimate the innovation and perseverance of the Israeli people. The second point I would make is, to me, the most significant thing in this entire process is what hasn't happened. What hasn't happened is that neither China nor Russia have come to Iran's aid. Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis did not come to Iran's aid. And of course, none of the other Muslim countries, all of them Sunni Muslim, not Shiite like Iran, they are issuing just pro forma, we condemn what Israel is doing, and then that's it, crickets, because they too are happy to see that Iran was their greatest threat as well as Israel's greatest threat. So to me, one of the most significant things is that Iran found themselves with absolutely no allies. Either Israel had defeated them or the rest of the world decided Iran was not worth mixing it up with the US and Israel.
Yeah, I want to ask you a little bit more about that. I had a couple of questions I thought would be interesting to discuss, and one of them is, why don't you think anybody has helped Iran? I mean, we've been hearing nonstop about this new axis of evil, of resistance to the United States. You think Iran, China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran was supplying Russia in their war in Ukraine. They
Right.
were obviously partnered with the Assad government. I mean, they were sponsoring ill will and terror around the world. They seem to be kind of an essential piece of this group. Why didn't anyone help Iran after this happened? I guess as of now, they have not.
Yeah. Well, I think I would be shocked if any of the Sunni Arab Muslim nations around there, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, none of them would I expect to come to Iran's aid. They will do diplomatic things, but they will not come to their aid because Iran is a threat to them. Russia has taken a big black eye in Syria because they were propping up the Assad regime, and now a second black eye with Iran. And the reason that I think that happened, Cole, is because Russia, which we all know, has bitten off far more than they expected in the Ukraine war. I don't think Russia is a paper tiger. I think Russia is dangerous. They have nuclear weapons. They're pressing it with Ukraine, but they did not have the ability to really help Syria or Iran because they were mixed up in their own adventures, misadventures, I would say. And then finally, the most dangerous opponent is China. China, I think, is just too smart to get involved in this. They could see it was a losing battle. China has their own issues. China is happy to stir things up for the U.S., but at the end of the day, China wants to control the South China Sea and Taiwan, and they're not going to risk anything for Iran. So I think China is just the smartest of the group, and they've decided that they'll cut Iran loose and focus on what they want. I'm a little bit surprised that China hasn't taken this opportunity to make more aggressive moves in the South China Sea. And at some point, I do expect China to invade Taiwan,
Hmm.
sometime in Xi Jinping's lifetime. This was not the time, apparently, but I think in a nutshell, that's my thinking on why the various parties all decided to stay out of this.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. I don't disagree at all. I think the the China issue is what's driving a lot of the split in even the Republican Party. So you have two or more groups of Republicans on this topic. You have kind of your classic conservatives who are labeled consistently as war hawks. They're blamed for George W. Bush's invasion of Iraq, warmongers, all of that. I mean, you've seen a ton of stuff about that in the last few days, except that those people are looking ascendant because they've wanted to take military action against Iran for a long time. Then you've got
Hmm.
this kind of isolationist America First group that, their loudest cry has been, why are we getting involved with Ukraine? Why are we sending them so much stuff. This doesn't have to do with us. They're not a NATO ally. It would be another Iraq or another Gulf War to try and go in and impose our democracy and our values on a place that doesn't want them. And so in the lead
Hmm.
up, I think the strongest voices against President Trump acting and bombing these nuclear facilities was, is this going to be another Iraq?
Right.
You saw how that went. It didn't go well in Afghanistan, didn't go well in Syria. Why are we even messing with this? This is Israel's war. We should not be involved. So you've had that kind of laid out, and I think we'll
Hmm.
see what happens here. And I certainly don't want to be in the position of trying to read President Trump's mind, but I do think the peace through strength group is ascendant in the Trump White House. And
Hmm.
that is, yes, we were resistant. The Trump people were very resistant to helping Ukraine, but there is a line that you need to establish in the world to deter mostly China, showing we will act. If it's in our best interest, if we deem that it's in our best interest, we will
Hmm.
act, we will flex our muscles, we will project strength out in the world. We're not completely isolationist. And so I think from Trump's perspective, this is something that is sending as much a message to China as it
Right.
is anything else. I mean, this was a decisive action against the threat that Iran poses to us and to others in the region. But I think, too, one of the motivators is wanting to show China we are not afraid to intervene when the time comes. Now, bombing Fordow and whatever will play out in Taiwan are so many scales of magnitude different that I don't know that this
Right.
directly translates to what we would do there, but I do think the Trump administration has wanted to show the world we're back to peace through strength. This was a very, very good opportunity to do it. And I think that's one reason that these others have not
Hmm.
helped is that they don't know if they're next.
Right.
Russia certainly, I think, with the negotiations that have been going on there, Trump has been embarrassed by Russia several times in the last few months. He campaigned on the fact that he could end this thing in 24 hours. He didn't. He thought that they had brokered a solution. They hadn't.
Hmm.
He's upset with Putin, and who knows what will happen there. I mean, we really don't know. But I do think if you're Russia, you think we're probably towing, a line that we're not sure quite where it is at this point. We should
Right.
stay out of this.
Yeah, I think whether you like Trump or not, you have to admit, just as a matter of fact, resolute leadership matters. And I think Trump is resolute. My second opinion, and this is an opinion, is if the U.S. were ever going to act in the Middle East, this was the time.
Yeah,
Israel had
yeah.
done a lot of the work, and this was the time. And then my third point is I am pleased to see that the Trump administration seems to be retaining their focus. The focus of this effort was to prevent Iran from being able to acquire a nuclear weapon, period. Not
Right.
regime change, not even knocking out their ballistic missile capability. That was a goal for Israel, but not for the United States. So I think resolute leadership with a very focused objective and then choosing the right time. I have to say, hats off to the Trump administration. I think this has been handled quite well. How will it play out? We'll see how it plays out, but I don't know, given the information we had, that any strong leadership would make any different choices.
Yeah, and I was encouraged to see that a lot of voices from around the political spectrum were saying this very thing a week ago. This
Hmm.
is the time. I mean, it's never a great thing. It's never anything anybody wants to see military action like this, but this
Right.
is the moment. If not now, when? I mean, they've been weakened. They're aggressive. The intel, who knows, what we'll find out later, but the intel would be that they were very, very, very close and trying to make that leap, not just from having enriched uranium to having a bomb that they could mount on a delivery mechanism and strike the US or Israel. So it
Hmm.
seemed like even people with pretty different political persuasions thought this is a good time to do this. And by all accounts, at this point, we need more information. I think the one question mark for me is how much of that facility did they actually destroy?
Right.
I haven't been able to find anything definitive on that. I've been able to find some things that General Kane talked about, but I
Hmm.
didn't I didn't find that to be definitive. I don't know how much we destroyed there. And if it was complete destruction, that's wonderful. If not, there may be more to this story. But what the Trump administration is doing now is they're calling this the 12-day war. They want it to be over. They want the peace, negotiations to work out between Iran and Israel. As far as our objectives go, things are pretty much done, and we'll see how that plays out in the future. Here's another question for you. We talked about regime change in terms of the U.S.'s goals. I guess a quick question would be, do you think this will result in regime change in Iran?
I personally don't think so, and I will say take that with a grain of salt, but I'll tell you why I don't think so. And it is the simple fact that there does not appear to be a strong Iranian resistance because the government has been so brutally oppressive, and the resistance does not have weapons. This isn't a
Hmm.
serious situation where you have armed parties. I'll say this, if there is regime change, it will need to have the involvement of the military. And I
Yeah.
think by taking out all of the senior generals, what are the odds that you get some colonel who now becomes a general who realizes that, you know what, I could run this place
Hmm.
and has a coup, or someone who says, you know what, I'm not that strong a Shiite, and I really don't think the Ayatollah's done a good job, and I am going to participate in an uprising of people. I think, barring that happening, I don't see it as a likely, as regime change being likely. And again, I could be wrong, but that's my analysis of it.
Hmm. Yeah, I think there's going to be chaos in certain
Hmm.
parts of Iran. I mean, just I was listening to somebody talk about this the other day, and they said, well, just actuarially, the guy is 86 years old. I mean, it's just a matter of time. Does he have a clear successor? People have talked about his son. People have talked about various presidents. Of course, you have the son of the Shah, who's talking about reforming a government. I mean, there are some things that are taking shape that could lead to regime change or at least chaos in the region. But it does appear, and will Israel be able to stop at some point? I don't know. But it doesn't look like there's a direct line to regime change right now. That's one that, again, next week people
Right,
could listen to this and say, man, they were totally wrong on that. But there doesn't look to be, that doesn't look to be what anybody is actually aiming for right now. The
right,
nuclear facilities and the ballistic missile capabilities look to be the things that Israel and the U.S. agreed that they would destroy.
right.
Um, Here's another interesting question. Do you think this will further the goal of the Abraham Accords? What do you think this does to the Trump
Yeah.
administration's goals in the Middle East?
I think it accelerates the Abraham Accords. I don't know how it's going to play out, but the rumor was that Saudi Arabia was close to signing before October 7th, 2023.
Hmm.
And that perhaps, and I can't verify this, that was even one of the reasons for that, is to disrupt that. But Iran is very weak now. And it seems to me that you might actually see some dominoes fall, that you could see some of the big Middle Eastern players enter the Abraham Accords and take ownership for peace in the Middle East. They couldn't do it when Iran was the 800-pound gorilla who was about to get a nuclear weapon. But now that door is open. So I'm very hopeful that the Abraham Accords will actually accelerate at this point.
I hope that's the case too. I think the goal of the Abraham Accords has been proved right, that it is better to organize policy in the Middle East around Israel and Saudi Arabia and normalizing relationships there against a common enemy than it was to think that you could, through diplomacy, get Iran to be a better behaved leader in the Middle East. I don't
Right.
think that was smart. So I think this proves that that was right. I think it sets it forward. I guess my one question as things have gone on is without Iran, do you have as strong a motivation on Saudi Arabia's part to partner either with Israel or the US? Because they will be the undisputed leader of the Muslim world in the Middle East now. They won't have this other pole, the Shia pole in Iran, or at least not with that amount of strength. They will not have as prolific a network of terrorists in the Middle East.
Right.
So you do wonder how they capitalize on this opportunity. I think and I hope that they capitalize on it by normalizing relations with Israel, by continuing to pursue relations with the United States. They have an effectively secular government in Saudi Arabia right now. They're not
Hmm.
nominally that way, but they're moving in secular directions, whereas Iran and others were moving in a more oppressive, theocratic regime. That seems to be a much better trajectory for peace in the Middle East and with Israel in the Gulf states and in Saudi Arabia than it was with Iran being in the mix. So I'm hoping that's the case, but that's the one question mark I have is how will Saudi Arabia take advantage of their newfound they got stay moded. They didn't nothing happened to them, but their greatest rival got eliminated. And what will they do
Right.
about it?
Right. I agree. And I think that we could get back to a more normal Middle East. And here's what I consider a normal Middle East. No one has ascendancy. Turkey would like to be the preeminent nation representing Islam. Saudi Arabia would like to be the preeminent nation representing Islam. Egypt has always wanted to be the preeminent nation representing Islam. I think that tension is healthy and can be used to keep the Middle East peaceful.
Right.
That's back to a normal Middle East. Iran basically upset the normal Middle East by becoming ascendant. And I think the chances for peace are far better now. But we shall see as it plays out.
Well, the last question, and maybe the most important for our listeners here on the So We Speak podcast, is: Are have we advanced through to some next stage in the end times? Is this has this ushered in something that we see as biblically relevant? Has anything changed in our eschatology over the last few weeks? What do you think about the theological implications of this?
That's a great question. If you are a dispensational viewer of the end times, you probably saw the rapture index pretty high the last few weeks, meaning
Yes.
that it sure looked like all the forces were lining up. You had Iran and Russia and China all targeting Israel, looked like they were doing a good job. If you remember back when we had pro-Hamas protests throughout Europe and the United States, it was looking like, hey, they're coming together and we're just going to do this Armageddon thing. I would say that today, that's a different picture. Iran has lost its allies. Iran is humbled. I'm not saying they won't be back. I'm simply saying that today I would say the rapture index has gone down quite a bit.
Yes, I would say that's true. I couldn't help but cue this up in our notes to talk about the interview between Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz. Um, I still don't know what I think about that interview. I don't think either of them came out of that looking particularly good. But I can confidently say that we both know how many people there are in Iran. And I can also say that we should talk a little bit about what Cruz said about Israel, because this is a big thing for a lot of Americans. Is why do we help Israel? Why do we? And there's all these conspiracy theories going around right now about Trump and Israel and Netanyahu and all of that. But I do think so. What Cruz said was the Bible says that anybody who blesses Israel will be blessed. And when he was pressed on that, Tucker Carlson asked him, "Do you mean like Netanyahu's government in the state of Israel right now is what God was talking about?" And they dispute over the passage, but we're talking Genesis 12 here, the promise to Abraham that I will make you a great nation. I will bless those who bless you. I'll curse those who curse you, and through you all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. And if you spend any time on Twitter, X, the last few days, you've seen that everyone now is a theologian on this. And I've seen some
Uh-huh.
great takes and I've seen some horrible takes. I haven't seen very many people coming to Ted Cruz's aid in his particular interpretation of Genesis chapter 12. And yet, that is a fairly standard, hardcore dispensational
It is.
view. I just don't
Right.
think there's that many people. I think most dispensationalists now are what are they called? Progressive dispensationalists. And so
Right.
some of the understanding of the geopolitical parts of dispensationalism have changed. But yeah, not many people coming to Cruz's rescue here theologically.
Yeah, just to oversimplify this, you have those in amongst Christianity who believe that God is not finished with Israel. Now, Whether you think that's the current secular government of Israel or the religious group of Jewish people, let's set that aside for just a moment. That God is not finished with the Jewish people. And there's some kind of parallel track running between the church and the Jews. So obviously, you have that group very much into, and it has been very influential in the 20th century and really helped Israel that Americans held that view by and large. On the other end of the spectrum, and I don't want to go too far, is a bit of a grafting in theology. And I'll just tell you, this is more where I am, and that is that God has grafted the Gentiles and believing Jews together, and this is a new chosen people. But I do believe that it is God's nature that whatever you think about the government of Israel or the Jewish people, I'll make 2 points. In Genesis 12 and Numbers 24, he says, if you bless Israel, you'll be blessed. If you curse them, you'll be cursed. And whether Israel is today is faithful Israel or not, God has a habit of blessing Israel for the sake of the patriarchs. And
Hmm.
so I do think that God does still look to the Jewish people and care for them in some measure. And the reason I think this, Cole, is plainly historical. If he did not, the Jewish people would not be here.
Hmm.
There are only about 15 million Jews in the world. Hitler killed 6 million of them. And after World War II, the Arab nations invaded in 1948 and decided they would finish that process. They failed. Iran and all of their proxies just attacked Israel and should have won, and they failed. So I'm not dispensational. Nevertheless, I would simply say God seems to be gracious to Israel even when Israel isn't faithful. And it sure historically looks to me like, and I think most Israelis, even if they aren't religious would say somebody up there likes us. So, yes, I do believe that God is doing something with the Jews today, but I don't go so far as to say that he's on a parallel track with the church.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a difference when you talk about that versus salvation. And some of these
Right,
passages in the New Testament are talking about how salvation will be brought to the world. There are ways of blessing people in the world apart from the number one blessing, which is salvation. I think that's
right.
some nuance that isn't always there in these theological discussions. I mean, if you go back to Genesis 12, I think what we would both agree is the promise to Abraham is being fulfilled through the church. That
Hmm.
as Paul says, not all children of Abraham are true children of Abraham.
Right,
All those who believe are sons of Abraham. So you do have this grafting in of the Gentiles into the church. I think a lot of the New Testament is written about that. Paul spends his life arguing that this is the case, that Gentiles
agreed.
are fellow
Yeah,
heirs. So I think we both think, yeah, that prophecy, that promise to Abraham is being fulfilled through the church. The church exists to bless the world.
yes.
And that's the big piece of this. Now, maybe we would disagree slightly in how this plays out. I think of the passage that Paul talks about in Romans 9, 10, and 11. Is there nothing then for the Jews? Is it worth nothing to be a Jew? And Paul says, no, of course this is still an important heritage. This is still an important group of people. They received the oracles of God. They stewarded the law. They had the tabernacle and the temple in their midst. I mean,
Right,
God has clearly picked this group of people to dwell with and to be with in a way that he didn't with anybody else. How does that move into the future? I tend to put almost zero stock into the nation of Israel as a special group of people theologically. But I
hmm
could I could definitely where like what you said, I could definitely see that God is continuing to bless the people of Israel, the ethnic Israel, because I'm not sure exactly what Romans 11 means. I
right,
think what Romans 11 means when Paul says that all Israel will be saved, I think he means all true Israel will be
right,
saved because of the Gentiles coming in. I don't read that as there's going to be this second wave of salvation of ethnic Israel. But Paul
right.
does speak a lot about his care for his countrymen. He does speak a lot about God's
Hmm.
blessings and his promises are irrevocable. And so how that plays out, I don't know. But what I
Yeah,
would say is we should respect and we should feel as Christians, at least, not the United States here for a moment, as Christians, we should feel the camaraderie with Israel and the land of Israel, the people of Israel, because that in a lot of ways is our heritage as well as believers.
Yeah, and I agree with you. This isn't a salvation issue. I don't think God is blessing the Jewish people today with they too can only be saved by grace through faith in Jesus Christ. But I just have seen throughout the Old Testament and then historically that sometimes even with an unrighteous people, people that don't believe, for the sake of their ancestors, he will not let them be destroyed. And I
Hmm.
think that may be what's happening with Israel is simply for the sake of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their forefather David, he simply won't let them be wiped out.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't necessarily side with Cruz on this, but I would push back against what he was pushing back against with Tucker Carlson in saying that even if you don't have any religious commitment to Israel, which I don't think America as a country does, we certainly should have geopolitical commitments to Israel. If you
Exactly.
just
Right.
looked at a map of the world and you didn't think twice about who was what ethnicity or heritage or
Right.
history or anything like that, you have one Western democratic force for good in the Middle East who has been a lifelong ally of the United States, and we should support them. Not to say that we
Right.
aren't building relationships with the bigger Muslim countries there, those are good too, but their values are so different, their capabilities are different. Israel has proven over the last 2 years to be if you put US in a category by itself, maybe with China, then Israel is clearly a tier two military power in the world. Why
Hmm.
would you, and they have very, very similar values to us, they have history with us. Why would you not want to ally yourself with that group first and foremost in that region of the world? That's what I don't get is people that have no religious dog in this fight. How
Right.
do you not see geopolitically that this is a great move for us? I mean, they're
Right.
our anchor country in that part of the world. They're very capable. You may not like Netanyahu, a lot of people don't, but you have to think of all the countries in that region, that's the one that's in our best interest to be allied with.
I agree. Whether theologically or pragmatically, I think that's part of why you see so much support for Israel in America.
Well, since we've been talking, and I'm sure there have been developments here, but I hope this has been a helpful overview, both from a historical perspective, from a geopolitical perspective, and lastly, from a faith perspective of how we should see this conflict and what we think might happen in the future. So we may have to record another episode soon to keep up with all the details that are panning out this week, but hopefully this was a helpful start to this conflict and to the last few weeks of events here at the So We Speak podcast.